Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our June 4th media availability following the Emergency Advisory Committee meeting of Council. You'll hear from the Mayor, followed by Interim City Manager Adam Laughlin, and then we'll have time for questions. And I want to also thank Diane DeAndrade and Kevin Holt for their interpretive services. Over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thanks, Katrin, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. The Emergency Advisory Committee of City Council voted effectively to end the local state of emergency as of midnight tonight. This decision was taken because key indicators City Administration is using to track COVID infection rates and compliance amongst Edmontonians around physical distancing health orders indicate that we're doing fairly well. I would like to stress, however, that we are still not in the clear. We're still in the grip of a major public health emergency. The virus has not disappeared, far from it, and we may still be very much at risk of a second wave of infections if we do not keep up the excellent work that we've been doing so far here in our city as a community. Lifting the local state of emergency does not mean that everything just goes back to the way it was. We are only on the threshold of phase 2 of Alberta's relaunch strategy, and there is still much more work to be done. Council also continues to have the ability, if we need to reinstate a state of local emergency in very short order should the need arise again. In the meantime, however, to protect our communities, I ask Edmontonians to continue to follow Alberta Health guidelines as outlined by Dr. Hinshaw and her excellent team. Given that we're still dealing with the pandemic, committee also recommended a motion for Council's consideration next week that will require City Administration to continue regular public updates on the status of the pandemic and the City's public health response. This will ensure continued Council oversight and public transparency as we move forward with combating COVID-19. We'll also be reaching out as a result of this motion to the provincial government regarding the enforcement of public health orders to ensure specifically that we have it in writing that our peace officers can still enforce public health orders even if we don't have a state of local emergency and even after the expiry of the provincial public health emergency, which we understand may come in the coming weeks. The committee also recommended to Council that administration draft a report with recommendations for the provincial government to potentially consider for further amendments to the Emergency Management Act based on the many lessons learned to date here. This would allow us to potentially better manage public health emergencies that run over a longer period of time and require less sweeping authority than contemplated in the current Emergency Management Act. And this could help us if and when a second wave of COVID comes. So we've learned important lessons from this pandemic, and we want to ensure that the way we handle future public health emergencies is improved. We still have funding challenges to consider, and I know I've mentioned them before, but there is still urgent need for funding to flow from the Government of Alberta and the Government of Canada to help cover our substantial losses to date and so that we can begin to get back to a new normal. Now, I certainly appreciate that it's not just the City of Edmonton that's been asking for this. We now have letters of support from the City of Calgary, our regional neighbors, the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association, the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, the local Chamber of Commerce, the Business Improvement Council of Edmonton, which now includes our 13 business improvement areas, the Urban Development Institute, the NAOP, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association, BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association, as well as the coalition of 5 local civic unions. All of us together, this broad coalition, are keen to recover, see our city recover economically, get as many people as possible back to work. And this funding is critical for the city to get back to work as an organization and for us to support all those others who depend on the city, whether it's to get to work or for other essential services. Now, overall, I am very proud of the way that the City of Edmonton has managed this emergency, and all of you, I hope, are proud of your city as well. It may be a little while yet when social distancing measures will be removed and we can give all those hugs that we want to give to our loved ones and those people who've been serving us so well, but we are one step closer to that. In the meantime, though, we need to continue to be patient and continue, if possible, to be gentle with one another. Speaking of which, as I noted in my statement on Monday, racism is still a problem. and we must continue to combat it here in Edmonton. And I am supportive of the work that many Edmontonians and organizations are doing to fight injustices and create a more equitable society. As an honorary witness of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, this work in our city is close to my heart, and Black Lives Matter everywhere, including in Edmonton. Now, a number of community groups have organized protests to help advance this important work, and some of them are organizing protests that will take place tomorrow. And I support, always have, Edmontonians' right to protest. And given, however, that we're still in the midst of a pandemic, I would simply ask that those attending these protests continue to follow diligently public health precautions and consider, of course, staying home if they are experiencing any COVID-like symptoms. Now, over the last week or so, I've been doing a lot of reading of my own and a lot of active listening to what community members here and activists from across the continent have been saying. And Edmontonians should know that my office and I have been talking directly to community members and reaching out to city stakeholders and to civic administration to ensure that we are continuing to do our part to move anti-racism initiatives forward and continue to address systemic racism. I do want to acknowledge that this work requires a joint effort by council and city administration and the community. And while I cannot speak for all of my city council colleagues, I know and have seen that many of them have expressed their commitment to supporting this work, and I look forward to working with all of you on tackling this important issue. We've added a discussion with the Edmonton Police Service and the Edmonton Police Commission about these matters for Wednesday's council meeting at 9:30 in the morning. So thank you all for tuning in, and now I will hand it over to Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Today at the Emergency Advisory Committee, I shared an update on the action the city has recently taken as part of the Stage 1 reopening of our economy. The city has 80 permanent community gardens on both city and private land. That includes 29 pop-up gardens that are part of our 2020 initiative. We have 5 shared street locations that are scheduled to open this week. They include 113th Street from 111th Avenue to 105th Avenue, 109th Avenue from 118th Avenue to 109th Street, 109th Avenue from 109th Street to 106th Street, 96th Street from 111th Avenue to 103A Avenue, 108A Avenue from 96th Street to 94th Street. A total of 43 businesses have applied for outdoor retail patio expansions, and most are in the process of developing their plans. We continue to monitor compliance with physical distancing, hygiene, and group gathering requirements in all outdoor city sport, play, and open space amenities. There were no major concerns over the past weekend, and there will be no closures this coming weekend. The Animal Care and Control Center began its staged reopening last week, and it is operating at 30% capacity for the intake of stray dogs. Phase 2 of the reopening will include the intake of stray cats, and that will begin on June 15th. 200 electric scooters rolled out on Edmonton streets Monday with strict hygiene requirements in place. The number of scooters available will be increased in stages provided that the operator continues to comply with the city's requirements. In preparation for June 15th, reintroduction of transit fares, we are working through the details for the distribution of tickets and passes to different customer groups. The city has received 500,000 non-surgical face masks from Alberta Health Services and is putting together a plan for distribution to transit customers. As the Mayor mentioned, based on the ongoing assessment of the COVID-related emergency conditions in Edmonton, I recommended to the Emergency Advisory Committee today that the state of local emergency not be renewed. I want to be very clear with Edmontonians. The COVID crisis is still with us. the risk of transmission remains high. It is not business as usual. We expect spikes in infection rates in the future as the public health restrictions are lifted and Edmontonians connect more with people outside of their family cohorts. The city will continue to need speed, flexibility, and nimbleness for decision-making in the weeks and months ahead. This is how we have operated in the past, and it's how we intend to operate in our relaunch and recovery phases. Administration can continue to be quick and agile within its existing authorities. We will continue to make decisions on matters relating to employees, operations, and strategy. Administration will continue to report in alignment with council direction on issues affecting the city. By allowing the state of local emergency to lapse, council does not gain any additional authorities or new functions. To continue to reactivate our economy and community, open and responsive communications are essential. This afternoon, I repeated administration's commitment to regularly share information, decisions, and data with council. This is one way we can do our part to ensure our relaunch is safe and effective. I'd like to conclude with a personal statement. It's been impossible to watch the events this week without being reminded how critical it is for us to work in an inclusive and equitable way. As an organization that is led by mainly white leadership, the city is deeply committed to examining and activating our role to address violence, racism, oppression, and discrimination in the organization, in the city, and in society in general. This means we will continue to look within and address our own biases and the ways that systemic and structural racism plays itself out. You have my commitment that our leadership team will continue to work to embed GBA Plus approach in all of our work and will closely listen to those that have lived with racism so that we can learn from them and lead more effectively. Thank you, and the Mayor and I are available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Adam. We'll take your questions now. We have 4 reporters online. I'll go first, please, to Jeff at the Edmonton Journal. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you. Just making sure I wasn't on mute. Can you just go over what ending SOL means for the Expo Center, the Kingston Center, and let me see, I believe it's the Lions as well?
So just make sure I heard your question, Jeff. What does not renewing the state of local emergency mean for the Expo Center, Kinsman, and Central Lions?
Yes.
On the basis of different guidelines and orders that have been put in place by the provincial government and the good work of the agencies and the City of Edmonton, what we're seeing is that the number of cases within the homeless community from a COVID-19 perspective is currently at 0. And so the powers that we required previously to activate, the operations are going well from that. And with the cases being low or at 0, operations can continue in those 3 facilities without the state of local emergency. However, we are working closely with the government of Alberta and the agencies to ensure that when the time is right, there is a wind down of those facilities, provided that there is a appropriate accommodation for that population, the homeless population, to ensure that they have the right amenities and are taken care of in a human way. So, short answer is the not renewing the state of local emergency doesn't impact our ability to continue to provide service at Expo and Kinsman and Central Lions, working with the agencies.
Thanks, Jeff. Did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, this one's on transit. I know it was discussed a little bit that it's still up in the air of when services will return to normal, but is there any expectations that things will return before September when school starts?
Not sure I can commit to a specific date on when we will return to normal service because we can't predict the conditions of what return to school will look like and what the ridership demands will be. For every service that we've either reduced or have closed as a result of the pandemic, we go through sort of a 4-stage assessment, and the 4 stages are: does opening it create more of a public health concern? Can we financially afford to do that? Is it a sustainable solution to reopen? And if there is a spike, can we reclose it, that service, or minimize that service? So when it comes to transit, it really comes down to, is the demand there, and can we afford to reinstitute the transit service to pre-COVID conditions?
Jeff, I'll go next to Vinesh at Global. Go ahead, Vinesh.
Yes, Adam, this is a question for you. Sorry, here, I just got to bring it up here. You talked about how the executive leadership team is mainly white, but you're working to, deal with stuff in an exclusive and equitable way to deal with oppression, racism, and discrimination. So can you expand upon that? And then just at the same time, addressing that leadership issue and just kind of having more diversity, is that part of this?
I can tell you what we are doing, and we are working hard to ensure that the GBA Plus framework is foundational in the decisions and the actions that we're taking at the City of Edmonton. We've taken many steps. We've recently updated our diversity and inclusion framework to provide more information and tools to address the barriers which are inadvertently created that excludes or hinders individuals. I mentioned the GBA Plus, that it's becoming foundational in our work. And as part of the framework, the diversity and inclusion framework, there's 4 pillars of inclusion: diversity, equity, skill, and growth. And we have specific actions that are underway under each of those to support our operations at the City of Edmonton. In terms of your specific question around looking at a change in leadership, I'm not sure that that's something that we're doing. What I can say is, like all of us, we need to make sure that we spend the time to understand and listen to those folks that have experienced racism, and as a leadership team, ensure that we're providing an environment where it's safe and healthy to work in, and we continue to do that.
Vinesh, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, this is a follow-up for the mayor, just along kind of the same lines here. Obviously, at the council table, it's quite, you don't see as much diversity there that's reflected, that doesn't reflect the city in general. Can you tell us, what's being done to, encourage more diverse candidates in the next election? Obviously City Hall can't predict the outcome, but can you speak to that regard?
Certainly. I think some of the work that we did between 2013 and 2017, we were able to quadruple the number of female candidates. That didn't translate into in substantially different diversity on council, as we went from 1 female to 2 female councillors. But in terms of increasing the supply of well-resourced candidates, we did quite a bit of work to support women from diverse backgrounds as well, to mobilize and run, and I'm quite proud of that effort, and I think it will bear fruit, as I understand a number of those strong women plan to run in the upcoming election as well. And so those efforts continue, and I think one of the most persuasive calls to action that I've heard this week actually came from our former poet laureate, Ahmed Nomadic Ali, who spoke Tuesday night at the virtual rally and talked about the need and opportunity for people from diverse backgrounds who have experience being racialized and having experienced racism in systems they deal with in their community to come forward and run. And over the weekend, former President Obama had a similar message of invitation to people from diverse communities to say that perhaps there's too much focus on the presidency. I think that's debatable, but that there needed to be ever more focus on diverse perspectives brought particularly to city halls and town halls and county halls. His message was for the United States, but I think it applies globally, that that invitation from leaders from diverse communities and from the Black community specifically to bring forward more candidates and for allies to get behind diverse candidates. I think those calls to action, I hope, will also lead to a more diverse group of candidates, and then it falls to Edmontonians, of course, to make the ultimate choice in the election. But more candidates is a necessary first step. But all indications I'm hearing is that there are a lot of wonderful community leaders and activists from diverse communities looking at the 2021 election right now, and I think they have even more reason to step forward and be part of bringing constructive solutions into public governance and the public discourse.
Thank you, Finesh. We'll go next to Keith at the Edmonton Journal. Go ahead, Keith.
Hi there. Question, I think, for Adam, although the mayor may want to chime in as well, just kind of following along that same questioning. In regards to the comments that the city needs to or is striving to be more inclusive and diverse, Adam, I'm wondering if you can provide maybe a couple of examples where maybe the city operations, city policy needs some work. Where are some areas in particular that need some work?
Sorry, Keith, you kind of broke up. Is your question, where are there areas that we need to do some work?
Yes.
I would say the work that we need to do is the work that's underway, which is continuing to create an environment that is, from a decision-making perspective, foundational in the GBA plus framework, continue to advance our diversity and inclusion framework, the art of inclusion, and continue. Learnings from these past few weeks is to not dismiss the conversation and continue to have the conversation with their staff around and understand and appreciate and tackle the implicit. Sorry, I'm not saying it correctly, but the biases that we carry to ensure that we're more open and considerate of the workforce that we want to have.
What I can say is, like all of us,
We had a delay there, so we were hearing Adam in an echo. Keith, did you have a follow-up? Because the mayor would like to add to that answer.
sure, and maybe you can address this follow-up in the same way. Hearing some calls from around the country and in Edmonton to claw back funding for the police or defund the police. Apparently an Ottawa councillor was even calling for that today in that city. I wondered what the mayor thinks about that idea.
Sure. Well, let's start with the first part of the follow-up to the previous question about tangible examples. I think council mandating gender-based analysis plus intersectional bias training for senior leaders in the organization based on a recommendation from the Women's Advocacy Voices of Edmonton, our Women's Advisory Committee, was an important step. Council going further and saying council should also take that training and mandating that training. I'm not sure all members of council have completed it. That is probably something that should be verified. But mandating it for ourselves and for senior decision makers at the city was an important step to building awareness of our own biases and the complexity of people's different individuals' intersectional experiences with the city, that was an important tangible step. I think another was that the city's diversity and inclusion framework was recently updated and involved a lot of not just consultation engagement, but real hearing of testimony from employees who've experienced or felt discrimination in the workplace, and also some really inspiring work was done. I remember an employee who's also a poet wrote about her experience of a bias in the world and her perception of it within the organization, and it was powerful and moving, and it was part of our event, and it was included in the material as well. So. And all of that to say, not only hearing from, but amplifying voices that have experienced challenges within the city with racism and discrimination, and including that as not just policy language, but as part of the appeal to the heart within our organization for leaders to take these issues seriously. So we're engaging in different ways and amplifying voices that haven't been front and center before from within our organization to help change hearts and minds on these issues. And I stand by that work and I'm proud of it. There's more to do though, clearly. On the question of resourcing for police, I think our city council actually has a really strong track record of weighing the challenges imposed by resource scarcity between police funding and other priorities. And we have an organization called Reach Edmonton, which is our community safety council, which we've invested in considerably. And on several occasions in budgets over previous years, we have chosen to fund those community safety partnerships over increasing the policing budget, because we believe that there is a strong return to working with community that way. So I think we have already prioritized many times community initiatives. Our work around ending homelessness and our anti-poverty work as well is all about upstream prevention. There's a very strong racial equality lens in both the homelessness work and the anti-poverty work. And there will continue to be, because we heard those lived experiences in all of our deep community engagement around both of those initiatives. So I think the requests that we continue to put to provincial and federal governments for more meaningful housing interventions across the housing spectrum, which would disproportionately support minority, refugee, and Indigenous families and individuals who are falling through the cracks of systems that are not serving them well right now. There is a very strong social justice and equity lens on all of those recommendations. So I think prioritizing that community approach is something we hold dear. And have held in balance with police funding over the years. And we've also introduced a police funding model through a policy that funds them essentially the way we would like to be treated by senior orders of government, with funding transferred to us, which is population plus inflation minus an efficiency factor. That's essentially what was in the city charter that we lost as an infrastructure funding formula. So I think it's important to give an organization as essential as the police some certainty for planning, for recruiting, for training, for hiring. But I think we've always held that, or long held that, for many years here, at least in my time as mayor, in the context of preventative efforts and policy interventions and community-based approaches to reducing crime.
Thanks, Keith, and thanks for waiting, Natasha. You're next. Natasha from the CBC.
Hi, thank you. Question is for Adam. I want to follow up on the operations at Expo and Kinsman. I just want to understand quite clearly, first of all, how does lifting the SOL affect your ability, or the city's ability, to manage what's happening there, or the transfer from downtown shelters to the Expo and Kinsman?
So in terms of the not renewing the SOL and the impact of operations on Expo and Kinsman, when the state of local emergency was initially approved, it was very helpful in terms of assembling and creating travel mechanisms and working with provincial officials to ensure that adequate resources were in those facilities and that the agencies were supported. As the operations have unfolded, we have, I would say from an administration perspective, operationalized the activities. So we've taken steps with transit to ensure that we've got good travel patterns, and we've taken steps on transit to address non-destination riders. We know there's still some challenges that come out in the area surrounding those facilities, so our peace officers are supporting that, and EPS are supporting that. So the decision to not renew the SOL doesn't hinder our ability to continue those operations, but I will flag that one of the yellow indicators that we had identified that should we see an increase in the number of COVID cases within the homeless population, it may require us to request going to or implementing another state of local emergency.
We'll do a follow-up with you in a moment, Natasha, but Jeff, if I could just ask you to mute your microphone. We're hearing a little bit of ambient noise from you. Go ahead, Natasha, with your follow-up.
Thank you. Okay, then, as Mr. Smythe was saying, it's estimated that it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks to transition those centers back to their original facilities. And then, so what, can you expand on what the city will be looking at to accommodate the homeless population going forward if these public health orders of 2 meters are still in place? So is the city looking at new facilities here?
I'm not sure if Mr. Smythe said that, but what he indicated is that there's work in place to look at a transition from Expo Center and potentially the Kinsman Center and Central Lions. What I had commented on in council was that before we did that, and working closely with Community Social Services, with the province, Alberta Health Services, and the agencies, we need to ensure that there's appropriate facilities on the receiving end if we were to wind down those facilities. And that's the body of work that's underway right now with administration, Mr. Smythe and his team, the agencies, and the 2 ministries within the provincial government. So we're not going to put ourselves in a position where there isn't the corresponding infrastructure to support closing those facilities. There's certainly a target from a timing perspective to as the different stages open up, and again, the number of cases are at 0 in the homeless population, and the number of cases in Edmonton in general being low, that the infrastructure is in place to support, but we need to make sure that all parties are on board, that it is in place, and we can comfortably wind down those facilities.
We have time for one more question to close, if anyone has one. Not hearing any. Thank you very much for being with us, and we'll look forward to speaking with you soon. Take care.